This segment of Open Up is brought to you in part by Abeta-Weed, the locally owned company that has everything you need for lush, weed-free gardens and lawns, from the smallest backyards to the property of the biggest businesses, and with top quality equipment and products better than the big chains, and they service what they sell. Located on Rosedale Highway, just east of Callaway, across from the promenade. Be loyal, buy local, abetaweed.com. You bet. Be loyal, buy local. You know, I'm just going to say this right out loud. You can go to Lowe's and you can go to Home Depot and you can get all that stuff. But I'll tell you what, Abeta-Weed has it all, and often much better than you're going to get at those big chains where the profits go out of our community. Abeta-Weed, all that money stays right here, paying salaries right here. And so I just think that's if you have needs in that area, that's the place to go.
Yes, and so we're back, Don. That was so exciting, just hearing those 7 lessons learned.
Isn't he a remarkable guy?
Yes, yes, Don.
And to share those.
I understand there's more to the story of your relationship, your friendship with him, and so one day we'll probably hear it, huh?
He and I were actually rival anchormen in Eugene, Oregon, and that's where we met. And a lot of drama took place there, a lot of great fun, but that's another story.
Yes.
Well, we have with us now, here we are on the anniversary of 9/11 that we do each year. We have with us an outstanding scholar, Mark Martinez, Dr. Mark Martinez, who's the chair of the Political Science Department at California State University at Bakersfield. And Mark, I think, let me just tell you about my experience with 9/11. My wife came in, I go to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I get to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so I have to kind of keep a schedule. My wife walks in early in the morning and tells me that 2 planes have flown into the Twin Towers in New York City. And
what time was that, she told you?
Well, what time would that have been? Would that have been
8 a.m.?
8 a.m. in
Yes.
the morning? You know what I did? I turned over and I went back to sleep. Instead of rushing to the studio like my boss expected me to, I knew that this was an event of such importance that when it started, when I got to that set, it was going to go on for months.
Right.
And I didn't want to show up groggy and sleepy, and I said, I'm going to go in fully rested so I can tackle this. That's exactly what had happened. For the next 3 months, I was up usually till 5 in the morning listening to every documentary, because now we've got to answer the question. It was the question that the little girl asked her mother as she was tucking her into bed, and she said, Mommy, why do they hate us so much? Mommy, why do they hate us so much? And what we were told was, well, darling, they're just evil people. We're good people and we're free, and they don't like our freedom and they don't like our system, and they're just evil people. That's what we were told. But in fact, the little girl was asking the adult question. The adults, and particularly a lot of politicians, were giving the childish answer. At least that's what I came to understand, and I came, Mark, to understand that a lot of things had led up to that. That just didn't happen out of the blue. It happened because of a lot of things. So
Absolutely.
Take us through it.
And your comments to Bryce earlier is spot on. When I talk about what's going on in the Middle East, this is something that just didn't happen overnight. And again, we're led to believe that they hate our freedoms, they don't understand liberal democracy and the rest of this stuff. But the reality is we've set ourselves up for this situation. What we're dealing with ISIS or ISIL literally is connected to a series of events that started. We can go back to 100 years ago, but I think where you started with overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953, the CIA-led overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. Why is that important? Because what it does is it helps set up the Shah of Iran, and the Shah is little more than a petulant thug with a crown. This leads to the Ayatollahs, who come to power in Iran by 1979. And when the Ayatollahs come to power, well, then all the other nation states in the Middle East get a little bit worried, because they're thinking, well, we're next. And so the Saudis and Saddam Hussein and the rest of these guys say, well, we need to do something about this. Well, the United States then started to do what? Fund Saddam Hussein and provide weapons of mass destruction. Those weapons of mass destruction that we were complaining about a few years ago, Saddam got those from us. And to the extent that he had those, and he really didn't have them because he had already used them or traded them off. But the point is that these events are very much connected to what we did in 1953. And now, if you look at what Saddam Hussein was doing 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 years ago now, this is a number of years, Saddam did not have weapons of mass destruction. He did not have access to nuclear weapons. We were told this because we needed to have this fear that he's coming to get us. Here comes the boogeyman. He's coming to get us, this mushroom cloud. And that simply did not exist. And so there's a lot of little stories that we don't know about, but we keep on going back to this region because we don't think these things through properly.
I remember the tragedy of Iran is that the Iranians loved us. They really saw America exactly as Ronald Reagan saw America, as a shining beacon of freedom and opportunity on the hill.
In 1953.
In 1953. And here they threw off the British Empire just like we did. And Mohammad Mossadegh comes to America. He stands by the Liberty Bell. He goes to Congress. He goes back to his nation, gives freedom of religion, freedom of politics, freedom for women.
What we would do to have somebody like him in the Middle East today.
Right.
And we threw him away. We threw him away to history because, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand, the connection to oil very much is there.
Absolutely.
And so when we look at what we're doing there, don't kid yourselves. It's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. It's tied to a barrel of oil. And so, and I think the book that you brought up, All the Shah's Men, if you have any inclination, your listeners have any inclination, that is the best written book, as far as I'm concerned, that explains what happened in 1953 and the involvement of the United States. It's just a fascinating read, and I'm surprised it hasn't been made into a movie yet.
And it was actually Winston Churchill, who went to Truman and said, "Let's overthrow this guy," because Churchill would not grant any concessions on oil. I mean, they were extracting that oil and giving the Iranians pennies on the dollar. The Americans were already giving 50%. Winston Churchill wouldn't budge. Truman told him, he said, absolutely not. He said, if we ever did anything like that, overthrow a government, he said it would be against international law, against our Constitution, against the spirit of the American people, and it would be a catastrophe of history if we ever did that. Churchill waited till Eisenhower came to power, and Eisenhower bought the argument.
Well, and actually, the interesting thing is Eisenhower didn't necessarily buy into the argument as much as he was misled by John Foster Dulles in the CIA. John Foster Dulles and his brother, Allen Dulles in the CIA,
right,
and his brother John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State for Eisenhower, and they deliberately kept information from Eisenhower because they knew that if Eisenhower knew the entire story, he would have said no to the invasion of Iran. Well, actually, the overthrow of Mossadegh. And the interesting thing is, I'm glad you brought up the point with reference to democracy. If you look at Iranian history, going back to the late 1800s with the Tobacco Revolution and just Mossadegh being where he was, Iran had the strongest tradition of democracy in the Middle East. And if you're looking for a beacon back in 1953 of democracy and what we should have been promoting, it would have been Iran under Mossadegh. We completely destroyed that entire environment.
Yeah, and looking back, Mark, when you do your own analysis, that could have absolutely began a transformation of the entire Middle East, could it not?
Oh, absolutely. Because what you had here, you had an example. You had an example of democracy working in the Middle East. What we ended up doing was putting energy into a group of radicals, because Mossadegh he did not get along, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. Mossadegh didn't necessarily get along. He understood the Ayatollahs and he understood the clerics, but he said, these guys are dangerous for these reasons. We need to continue to do things this way. That wasn't fast enough for the oil guys, and it wasn't fast enough for John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. And what we ended up doing was not only upsetting and overthrowing a regime, the Mossadegh regime in Iran, but literally here we are. What's this? 60 years later.
You bet, Mark.
And we're deeper into this mess, and I don't think anybody has any idea how to get out of this. I wasn't very impressed. I'm a supporter of Obama's. I was not impressed with last night. It's when we look at this notion that we are going to eventually get rid of and eradicate ISIS. With the plan that he announced last night, it's not going to happen. If anything, we're just going to throw more fuel on the fire. Provided that we're not seeing something that I didn't see last night. But last night was not impressive.
We'll come
Right.
back to that. We need to take a break right now. We'll be right back.
Yes. Thank you.